Hello everyone, it's Benny, and welcome to video 34 of the 3D Game Engine tutorial series. In this video, I decided to go ahead and start with the game object system, because, I thought about it, and we could do some refactoring of the rendering engine at this point, but there's no good order to do this, and at least this way, it'll give you a slightly better idea as to why the refactoring is happening the way it is, if that makes any sense. So yeah, but first I'm going to start by moving the game interface. Okay, I can't move it here. I'm going to move the game interface into the core package, because it's a core part of the engine. Yeah, I forgot to do that in the last video, but that's alright. So now, everything should still be working. I'm going to double check, just to be sure. Any moment now. Here we go. Everything still works. Good. So now let's create the game object. So, I'm going to create a new class called GameObject. And these are going to be, just added to GitHub. But yeah, these are going to be, well, the nodes in the scene graph. So each one of these is going to be a node, and it's going to have children. So in fact, I'm just going to start there with its node properties. It's going to have some private array list of other game objects I'll call children, if I spell it right. There. These will be all the child nodes that, will inherit the properties of this game object, in some sense. So I'm going to go ahead and create public game object, just going to be the constructor, children equals new array list of game object, and there, nothing special. Just going to have an array list of, game objects. Or, children, which are game objects. There we go. And that's really all there is to implementing the scene graph, technically. I mean, there you go, there's a list of all the game objects. All of them are going to have their own lists, and etc., etc. But now let's actually use them. So I'm going to have methods for this. Public void input, public void update, and public void render. These are going to pretty much just mirror the behavior of the game class at the moment, but there'll be a few changes, and you'll see. So what I'm going to do, very simply, is I'm going to iterate through every single child node, and I'm going to update them in all these methods. So, for each game object I'll call it child, in children, so just going to go through every single one, and say child.input. There we go. And then an update, going to do the same thing, except for update. And for render, going to do the same thing, except for render. So there. Now they sort of act a bit recursively. They act, it will do the input for this game object, and then update all the children. Of course, I still need to do the logic for the input, but that's going to come right now, actually no. Almost right now. First off, I'm going to create one final method, public void add child. Takes in some game object, other, and just going to say children.add other. Well, okay, I'll call it child. Just because it makes a little bit more sense to me that way. And that's all the functionality I want in the game object class right now. So we have, doesn't do much, it's really just a node, has this huge gigantic list of all the children, all of them have their own children. When you input it it'll do the eventual input and then update all the children, and same for update and render, and you can add child. That's really the functionality I want right now. It's just the hierarchy. Now that we have the hierarchy though, now I want to actually implement it, make it do something useful. Now, like I showed you in the big gigantic architecture overview, the way game object functionality is going to be defined is with some game component. I'm going to call it game component just so you know it's, part of the game object. You could probably just call this component, but I'm not going to. So there, we have a game component. And again, this is going to have the input update render system. Probably should create some interface for that at some point, but oh well. So public void input, public void update, and public void render. And actually this is going to be an abstract class. Well, it's probably going to end up being an interface, but I'm going to make it... Okay, fine. Just following my policy as before, I'm going to make it an interface for the time being until it makes sense to make it, well, an abstract class. So, yeah. And it's just going to have the basic input update render system that we've had all along. That's going to define the game component. There's going to be a few more things here. In fact, I'm going to space out render, just as sort of a hint as to what the other thing might be. But, yeah. Oh, and I almost forgot, public void init. Just like, so pretty much it's a clone of the game interface right now, but with a few changes. And again, you'll sort of see what I mean. So, like before, it's going to have a private array list of game components. This isn't going to be a hierarchy like before, but it is going to have some components. And here, of course, components is a new array list of game component. There we go. And I'm going to have, just like with add child, I'm going to have, in fact, I'm going to copy add child. I'm going to have a method to add component. Game component, and I have to rename it because that's just how I am. And there, and whoops, need to name it add component. So there. Now we can add two things to these game objects. We can add children and components. Great. Still not doing very much. Now here's where the logic is really just going to come in. Like I said, all the logic's really going to be in the game component class, so the job of the game object class is simply to tell the component when to do what. So when I actually use input, then I'm going to go through every single game component in components. Every single one, and say component.input. And there. So pretty much very similar to what I've done with the children, except, well, with the components. And that's going to be the actual logic for the game object, for every individual game object class. And really there, that's almost everything the game object really needs at this point. There's just a few more things that I want to do here. And for one, that's give the game object a transform. Because that's the one quality I want a game object to always have, a transform. Some position, rotation, and scale. So there. And transform's just going to be initialized to a new transform. I'm not going to do anything with it just yet, but I do want it to be there. Okay, I guess if I'm not using it, I can just leave it commented out, but I'm eventually going to want to transform here, and you'll see why. Yeah, I'll go ahead and have the transform, because what I really want to do here is I want to say public void get transform. Just have a getter for it. And say return transform. Not return semicolon. Return transform. I'll go ahead and put that at the end. And there. So now the transform has some remote amount of purpose. Oh, and it returns transform. Excuse me. There. Now at this point, I'm going to try my best to actually use the game object class before, well, the end of this video. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my test game. I'm going to get rid of all this. Going to get rid of all this except for the camera. Going to get rid of all this commented out stuff. So that can go away, that can go away. And I changed over to basic shader rather than Phong shader, in case you didn't notice. Just because, well, lighting's going to need a lot of changes in like architecturally. The way we're going to do it's going to be the same, but it's going to need some architecture changes. And yeah, you'll see when we actually do it. Excuse me. I'm going to get rid of just about everything in the update, except for the transform.set translation, for now. And I'm going to get rid of the set clear color, for now. Well, no, forever. Other than that, I think these are all the methods I want to actually keep for the time being. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create... You know what, because it's bothering me, I'm going to make this back to an abstract class, because I'm going to need this to be an abstract class, and you'll see why. Although, you know what, let's just do game component class a little bit better before we move on. What I don't really want an init method. What I really am looking for is something along the lines of set game object. Because the component needs to know what game object it's supposed to be affecting. Because, well, it's going to need to know about the transform, and you could pass that in every single method. And you know what? That's honestly not a bad idea. So, you know what? Let's try that. That's not how I originally planned to do it, but let's see what happens. It's going to take in some transform, and you know, this might not work out. Oh, public abstract class, excuse me. You know, this might not work out, but let's try it. I didn't actually try this for some reason. So, let's see what happens. And yeah. This might fail horribly, but you never know. So, actually with this, I don't think it needs to be an abstract class, but you know, I'll leave it like that anyways. And there. And of course, we need to pass in transform for all these. So yeah. There. So now it's being updated with knowing about the game object's transform, since that's really all the data I'm planning on keeping in there. And let's do something. Let's go to the game and let's create our first game component. It's going to be Mesh Renderer. What's it going to do? It's going to draw a mesh using our rendering engine. So, it's going to, first off, extend game component. So there. And really all I need out of these methods is the render method. Don't need anything else fancy, just the render method. And I also want a constructor for this, because, well, need the data, to get the data somehow. I'm going to take in some mesh, and some material to draw the mesh with. That's what the mesh renderer is going to do. And it's going to store that mesh. So pretty much, yeah, mesh is just going to have private material, and of course import those. There. And so now I'm just going to set the mesh to, well, the mesh. And the material to the material. So there, we got our data. It's passed to the mesh renderer. Now we just need to render it. And this is going to be done using pretty much what we're doing in the render method in our test game. It's going to bind a shader, and for the time being, I'm just going to say my shader, yes, I want that, is going to be equal basic shader.getInstance. Because again, I don't want to deal with lighting just yet at this stage of the refactoring. So there. And really, I think that's all I need Mesh Renderer to do. It's a very simple class. At this point, actually, that means I also don't need getTransform and GameObject. So, let's just see what happens. Again, I'm improvising that part, so I don't know just yet. So let's see. Now let's get rid of this. I don't need that anymore. Don't need that anymore. And material and mesh, let's group those together, because that's what I'm going to be doing. Yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and define mesh, material. And let's create a mesh renderer. Let's create something of our new class. It's going to be a new mesh renderer, taking in mesh and material. There. And I'm also going to have some private game object. Call it root, because it's going to be the root object. Everything's going to be part of this object in some way or another. Just say root.addComponent mesh renderer. Whoops, mesh renderer. There. And now, if I just do root.input, root.update, and root.render, this should do the exact same thing we've always done, except maybe a little bit offset, because I'm not doing the translation anymore, but that's okay. At least it should be. And it crashes! 1 moment. And that was pretty easy. I just forgot to set root to a new game object. So now if I run... Oh, hey, we're not seeing anything. Is it broken? No, just back up a bit because we're not doing the translation. And look, it's just like before. Well, pretty much. Slightly offset. And you know what, let's fix that. Let's go to game object. I'll change back the getTransform. I'll bring that back. And just say root.getTransform.setTranslation to that. That'll be my update. I probably don't want that getter in the end, but nah, just for consistency, just to make it like before. There. And look how much less code that's taken us. This is like 50 lines of code. This is like 30 lines of code. And now if these classes, the game object and game component, this can scale really, really well. And you know, because it is bothering me, I'm going to make this an interface. It doesn't need to be right now. It's probably going to need to be an abstract class eventually, but it's bothering me. So, yeah, I'm going to make it interface. Not that it particularly matters, at least not at this point. And I'll go ahead and implement the rest of the methods. Oh yeah, and add the @override notation to render. And there. And I'll go ahead and move these back, because I'm not actually going to do anything with these. And there, so that's our mesh renderer. And I think that's just about everything I want to do in this video. So, thank you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned. And in the next video, well, you know what? I'll leave the details as a surprise for the next video. Thank you. See you then.